Emily Red was glowing with the joy of pregnancy, celebrated as a miracle by her small-town congregation. But her husband, Pastor Jonathan Reed, knew one horrifying truth: he had been sterile for over a decade. Pastor Jonathan Reed had always been a pillar in the quiet, leafy town of Millstone Creek. With his calm voice, warm eyes, and unwavering faith, he was trusted by nearly everyone. Emily organized charity drives, taught Sunday school, and cooked for the homeless every Thursday evening. They visited doctors in nearby cities, followed fertility plans, and even considered adoption, though they never moved forward. At one point, they looked into IVF, but Jonathan's medical report delivered a truth they had never shared: he was sterile. The church was packed with families celebrating the season's renewal. But when news came that Emily was not only okay but pregnant, the mood shifted from fear to wonder. It was the miracle they had all hoped for, even if they had stopped speaking it aloud. He knew something no one else did: this child couldn't be his. Maybe there had been a slim chance, but the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. He hadn't seen Emily visit a doctor recently, hadn't been with her for any treatments or fertility sessions. Could she have gone to a donor without telling him? Was there something darker, something hidden beneath the surface of her perfect smile? He hated the thoughts. They felt like betrayal, like sin. He started watching her closely, memorizing her routines. It lit up briefly before she turned it face down on the kitchen table. Tyler, the name meant nothing to him. But he needed to know the truth, not just for himself, but for the child, for their future. But something about the way she ignored it made him uneasy. That night, after she fell asleep, he quietly searched her phone. The miracle that had brought hope to Millstone Creek was unraveling into something far more complicated, and possibly far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Most texts had been deleted, but there were traces: missed calls, short messages, a contact photo of a man he didn't recognize. She still cooked breakfast, watered the garden, and attended women's groups. Everything appeared normal, too normal. But the doubt didn't fade. It deepened, tightening its grip on him each day. He hadn't even known she was trying. And suddenly there was a baby. He stared at the investigator's photo Emily at a door, her hand resting on her belly, smiling as she waited for someone to open it. The door belonged to Tyler Grant. The congregation noticed he seemed tired, distracted. They blamed it on the nerves of becoming a first-time father. No one imagined the real storm building behind his calm face. He had accepted his diagnosis years ago, seen the test results himself, heard it from more than one doctor. She seemed genuinely happy, full of light. She showed him ultrasound images, decorated the nursery, and picked out names. Nothing alarming. Emily stayed home, went to church, saw the doctor. Until one day a message came. Emily had been seen visiting someone at a nearby apartment complex. A man, the same one from the contact photo. Jonathan played the part. He smiled, nodded, even held her when she cried. But at night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by doubt. There had been no mistake. No second opinion had ever changed the verdict. A collective joy spread through Millstone Creek. Church members brought flowers, gifts, and baked goods. There were tears, laughter, and long embraces. They said it was divine intervention, a reward for their faith and patience. As the choir sang and the congregation stood in praise, Emily suddenly collapsed. The church froze in panic. She walked through the church with her hand resting gently on her growing belly, a soft smile on her lips. She spoke about the grace of God and the unexpected gifts that life can offer. People clung to every word. For a town that believed in signs and blessings, this pregnancy became a symbol of everything good. Jonathan rushed to her side as others dialed for help. She was conscious but weak, pale, and sweating. Paramedics arrived quickly, and she was taken to Millstone General Hospital, just 15 minutes away. A past illness had affected him in ways that couldn't be reversed. The couple chose to keep that truth between them. It was too painful, too final. Instead, they turned that pain into service, investing their energy into the church, into their community, and into each other. Together, the Reeds seemed to be the perfect image of love, purpose, and unity. But behind the curtain of this perfect life lay a silent sorrow neither of them ever spoke of publicly. They had no children, The townspeople would often say that if anyone was truly close to God, it was Pastor Reed. Every Sunday, the pews were filled, not just because of the rituals, but because people genuinely wanted to hear him speak. They simply accepted that the Reeds had been chosen for a different path. Jonathan, though burdened by the truth, always admired Emily's grace through it all. She never blamed him, never once expressed resentment, at least not openly. She told him that love was enough, that maybe some people were meant to serve in other ways. His sermons were simple, heartfelt, and never full of fire or fear, just guidance, patience, and hope. By his side, Emily Reed was equally adored. She had a graceful presence, the kind that turned heads not with beauty alone, but with the quiet strength she carried. For over 12 years, Jonathan and Emily had prayed, waited, and cried behind closed doors. As years went on, people stopped asking about children. Then, everything changed one bright Sunday morning in late April. Hours later, the town buzzed with confusion and worry. Emily, now glowing with new energy, embraced the moment. But for Jonathan, the news was a quiet nightmare. While the world rejoiced, he stood frozen in disbelief. At first, he tried to rationalize. Maybe the tests were wrong. He watched her carefully in the days that followed. The questions grew louder in his mind. Had she been unfaithful? As the pregnancy progressed, Jonathan began pulling away. He spent more time at the church office, locking himself in with his books and sermons. He tried praying more, searching for peace. But every time he looked at Emily, he saw something unfamiliar. Then, one evening, he noticed a name on her phone. Jonathan didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, he copied the number and called a private investigator the next morning. He felt shame, guilt, even fear. The investigator was discreet. Days passed, then weeks. Updates were few. Jonathan felt like the world had tilted. From that moment, Jonathan knew everything was about to change. Jonathan walked the halls of the church with an invisible weight pressing down on him. To everyone else, he was the proud, soon-to-be father, finally blessed after years of waiting. But inside, he felt like a stranger to his own life. The once clear path of his faith was clouded with suspicion, and the questions he carried grew heavier with every step. He still gave sermons and led prayer groups, but his heart wasn't in it. The joy he was expected to feel was buried beneath quiet dread. This time, he wanted background on Tyler, who he was, where he came from, and what kind of man he had been. For a man in his early 30s, it was unusual. Nightmares haunted him, images of betrayal, of a child who looked nothing like him, of standing before his congregation with a secret too heavy to bear. He began questioning everything. Had Emily always wanted more than he could give? Had she blamed him in silence for their childless years? Was this pregnancy an act of desperation or something worse? The investigator suspected he had started hiding his identity, possibly under pressure or fear. Jonathan wondered what Tyler had to hide, and more importantly, what Emily might be hiding too. A body had been discovered in a creek outside a neighboring town. At first, there were no details, just a vague mention of foul play suspected and identity unknown. But the following morning, his phone rang. The answers arrived quickly. Tyler Grant had worked as a personal trainer at a gym in a nearby town. Her voice trembled as she delivered the news. The body found in the creek was Tyler Grant, identified by fingerprints. Cause of death was a blow to the head. No witnesses, no suspects. The car was destroyed, but in the trunk, among the ashes, they found a charred Bible with her name inscribed inside. Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face as reality closed in. She continued to plan the baby shower, bake cookies, and sing hymns as if nothing in her life had changed. Tyler was dead, gone. Whatever secrets he held had been buried with him in the mud and rain. He realized the truth was no longer hiding in shadows. It was out in the open now, undeniable and heavy. What had begun as a divine blessing was rapidly turning into something dark and irreversible. The woman he had trusted, defended, and prayed beside for more than a decade. He simply stood there, wondering how much worse things could become and knowing in his gut that the worst was still to come. The woman who now carried a child that could not possibly be his, but someone had ended his life, and it wasn't by accident. The blow was violent, deliberate. It didn't look like a robbery. There was no missing wallet, no sign of struggle beyond the injury. Her smile never faltered, but to Jonathan it began to look unnatural, rehearsed like a mask. He had no criminal record but was known for dating several women at once. He left the gym abruptly 6 months ago. No one knew where he'd gone. He became more withdrawn, often finding excuses to leave the house or stay late at the church. When Emily asked if he was tired, he'd simply nod. She remained radiant, excited, and filled with the glow of anticipation. Finally, after nearly a week, he received a brief message. Tyler's gone, apartment empty, no forwarding address. She decorated the nursery with soft yellow tones, folded tiny clothes, and made lists of names. No notice to the landlord, no personal items left behind. His phone was disconnected. It was as if Tyler had vanished into thin air. The yellow walls, once a symbol of hope, now looked like a cruel joke. His sermons grew shorter, less inspired. The congregation whispered among themselves. Streets flooded, and the church's basement took in water. As Jonathan led volunteers in cleanup efforts, he felt numb. He worked through the storm, soaking wet, hands blistered, heart elsewhere. One of the younger church members commented that fatherhood seemed to have made him more intense. Jonathan forced a smile, but inside he was unraveling. They thought he was overwhelmed, maybe even scared of fatherhood. They had no idea his entire world was unraveling. Her joy seemed so genuine that it made Jonathan doubt himself. Maybe he really was losing his grip. Maybe, against all medical odds, something truly divine had happened. But then he would remember the lab results, the doctor's firm words, and his own silent acceptance of sterility all those years ago. The investigator continued his work quietly. He followed Emily's routine and reported everything. Most days were uneventful. She went to prenatal appointments, visited the library, and hosted Bible study sessions at home. Nothing in her behavior raised alarms. Still, Jonathan couldn't shake the unease, and the name Tyler Grant kept circling in his mind like a quiet storm gathering strength. Then came a moment that changed everything. The investigator sent a photo Emily at a local cafe, sitting across from Tyler. They weren't holding hands or showing affection, but the body language was intimate. Tyler leaned in as she smiled softly, her hand gently resting on her stomach. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to confirm Jonathan's fear. This wasn't just a passing acquaintance. She knew Tyler well. The next few days were unbearable. Jonathan found himself staring at the nursery door for hours. He didn't confront Emily. Instead, he requested another meeting with the investigator. A strange detail stood out. Tyler had no social media. No Facebook, no Instagram, no online trace. The unease grew unbearable. Jonathan stopped sleeping well. Then the investigator went silent. Days passed without updates. Calls went unanswered. Jonathan's worry turned to dread. The man Emily had been meeting had disappeared without a trace. Jonathan's mind spiraled. Did Tyler leave town? Was he running from something or someone? And why hadn't Emily said a word? That same week, a terrible storm hit Millstone Creek. A few days later, a local news report caught his attention. It was the investigator's assistant. Jonathan froze. 1,000 thoughts collided in his head. Then came the second blow. Police had found a burned-out car near the creek, registered to Emily Reed. She had reported it stolen 3 weeks earlier. The connection was undeniable. Emily had been seeing Tyler. Tyler had died. Emily's car had been near the scene. The Bible was physical proof. The miracle pregnancy, the hidden meetings, the missing man, the burned car, it all formed a web that led back to his wife. He stood in the empty church that evening, staring at the altar where so many had found comfort, but no comfort came to him. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan didn't pray. Jonathan couldn't escape the silence inside the church. The walls, once filled with hymns and voices of faith, now echoed with a stillness that chilled him. The pews, the stained glass, the pulpit all seemed distant, like relics from a life that no longer belonged to him. Tyler Grant was dead. Emily's car had been found burned near the scene. Her Bible, half-charred, had survived just enough to make the connection undeniable. Quietly, systematically, he found nothing, not a single note, photo, or message. But the office was closed, and the assistant who had called him before had gone silent. It felt like the world was closing in on him. The case, according to rumors in town, was still under review. Inside was a printed sheet with bank details, an insurance policy taken out just 2 months earlier. The name on the policy was Tyler Grant, the beneficiary. Emily read, it was real. It was signed. Emily had taken out a life insurance policy on the man she claimed not to know. She had expected him to die, or at least she had known there was a risk he might. Jonathan couldn't understand it. The car, the Bible, the connection to Tyler, it all seemed so obvious. But there were no fingerprints, no security footage, no direct evidence placing Emily at the scene of the crime. Jonathan walked back to the church in the rain, unsure of what to believe. The truth was there, just beyond reach, tangled in shadows and half-truths. But by the walls of their home, the faces of their congregation, the weight of his role. He thought about the child, the baby she still carried. A life surrounded by death, lies, and secrets before it had even taken its first breath. This time they found something. Hidden deep in the bottom drawer of Emily's knitstand, tucked beneath folded linens, was a small USB drive. On it were messages, hundreds of them. Emails, voice recordings, text screenshots. All between Emily and Tyler. Her phone had been wiped clean weeks ago. He checked drawers, cabinets, boxes in the closet. Nothing. She had been careful, or she had help. Detectives returned, this time with more pointed questions. Emily's calm cracked slightly, but she held her story. She said the policy was taken out as a favor, but she never said a word. She simply went on as if everything was normal. She said she couldn't destroy her image, her reputation, or her marriage. When she got pregnant, she panicked. Tyler had threatened to tell everything. He said he'd expose the affair, that he might even go to the press. She prepared a small basket for the upcoming church fundraiser and placed it on the kitchen table with a soft smile. Tyler had needed someone to help him with paperwork for a new job. She admitted they had known each other, but claimed it was a brief friendship, nothing more. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, placed her hands out to be cuffed, and walked with the officers down the steps of the parsonage she had once called home. She said she hadn't seen him in months. She denied knowing about the money, claimed she never expected to receive anything. His face was pale, unreadable. The woman he had loved, trusted, and defended for more than a decade had been living a double life. And now, that life had come crashing down. Yet she said nothing. She went on as if nothing had happened, carefully folding baby clothes and humming lullabies as she moved through the house. It sounded like a warning. Or maybe a final amen to the life they once had? Detectives had already questioned her and stared at the soft blue ribbon tied around it. A ribbon meant for celebration, now soaked in silence. He remembered the hesitation in her voice when asked about Tyler. He remembered the way she smiled through the chaos, calm and composed, as if she'd already written the ending to a story no one else understood. They came to the parsonage 2 days after the discovery. After they left, he waited to see if Emily would say anything, some confession, some crack in her performance, but she didn't. She made dinner, set the table, and asked if he wanted lemon in his tea. Emily greeted them politely. She repeated what she had told the rental company weeks earlier. The car had been stolen. While she was shopping at a local craft store, she had filed a report and never heard anything back. She denied knowing anything about the man found dead. When asked if she had ever known Tyler Grant, she hesitated for the briefest moment, then said no. The officers didn't press further, but Jonathan saw the look in their eyes. They didn't believe her, neither did he. He wanted to scream. But he didn't, not yet. That night he went through her things. He went back to the investigator's office, hoping for more clarity. Days passed without movement. The police hadn't arrested Emily. Then a new piece of information surfaced. Jonathan received an envelope, slipped anonymously under his church office door. The payout was listed at $250,000. Jonathan's hands trembled as he read the document again and again. That was the moment everything shattered. He remembered the quiet conversations, the secrecy, the car reported stolen without him ever hearing about it until the police showed up. He took the insurance document to the police. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to reignite the investigation. The police took notes. They thanked her and left. But the pressure was building. Jonathan waited for her to confront him, to ask why he had turned in the policy. Inside, Jonathan was unraveling. He felt trapped, not just by her lies. Then came the final turn. The police arrived with a search warrant. They searched the parsonage from top to bottom. They told a story far different than what she had claimed. They had been in a relationship for almost a year. Tyler had wanted her to leave Jonathan. He had pushed for a future together, but Emily had resisted. The last message from Emily read, "If you ruin this for me, I'll make sure you regret it. Don't push me." It was sent just 2 days before Tyler was found dead. With the new evidence, Emily was arrested the next morning. Jonathan watched from the kitchen window. As the police car drove away, the church bell rang once in the distance, a hollow, accidental clang in the breeze. Jonathan didn't pray. He simply sat down at the table, placed his hands on the basket Emily had made. Emily sat alone in the small, gray interview room at the county jail, her hands folded on the table, her face composed. The air around her was cold and sterile, the walls empty except for a clock that ticked louder than it should. She spoke in soft, measured tones. Her story was carefully structured, almost rehearsed. Yes, she had known Tyler Grant. Yes, they had been involved. She claimed it ended months before her pregnancy. She told the detectives that she believed the child was Jonathan's, despite what the doctors had said years ago. When the detectives asked about the life insurance policy, Emily's expression didn't change. She said it was Tyler's idea. He had told her he was afraid for his future, that he wanted to make sure someone he trusted could claim the money if something ever happened to him. She said it started after she met him at a charity marathon almost a year ago. Jonathan had been busy with the church, and Emily admitted she had felt isolated and overwhelmed. In the video, Emily could be seen filling a gas can, wearing gloves. The timestamp matched the evening Tyler had died. Her car, reported stolen, had been seen near the same area. Church members were divided. Some still believed Emily was innocent, claiming the stress of pregnancy had made her vulnerable and confused. He hadn't spoken publicly since Emily's arrest. He stayed in the parsonage for another week, alone, the house filled with the remnants of a life that had collapsed in on itself. Baby clothes still lay folded in drawers. The crib, assembled with hope, now stood like a tombstone in the nursery. The prosecution laid out a narrative built on betrayal, premeditation, and cold manipulation. Emily's threats were read aloud. The jury heard her words, saw her warnings, and were shown how everything unraveled after Tyler's death. They argued that Emily had orchestrated the entire plan, seducing Tyler, using him for the child she couldn't have with Jonathan, and eliminating him when he became a threat to the life she had built. He stopped attending church services. He stopped answering calls. The man who once led a congregation with unwavering faith now wandered his own home in silence, trying to piece together the truth from 1,000 fragments of betrayal. They claimed the relationship had spiraled out of her control, that Tyler's threats had left her scared and desperate. They didn't deny the affair. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove away from Millstone Creek. The building was eventually sold, the pews removed, the cross taken down. What had once been a sanctuary now stood empty, silent, a ghost of what had been. He didn't leave a note. He didn't say goodbye. They didn't deny she had met him that night, but they insisted the death was not premeditated. They suggested there may have been a struggle. They hinted at self-defense, panic, and the chaos of a situation gone horribly wrong. Others were disgusted, saying they had always sensed something wasn't quite right behind her picture-perfect smile. Emily was not allowed to see him, but she asked for updates through her attorney. She never cried during the proceedings, not once, and a witness recalled seeing a woman walking near the woods alone, holding what looked like a Bible. He didn't testify, he wasn't called, but his presence hung heavy in the room. Everyone knew who he was, the husband, the pastor, the man whose life had become the backdrop of a scandal no one would forget. She said Tyler had become aggressive when she told him she wanted to cut ties completely. She stared at it, blinked once, and said nothing. Then she asked for a lawyer. He didn't want to be shut out of the child's life. He said he would tell Jonathan everything. Emily claimed she was frightened. When asked if he believed Emily was capable of killing Tyler, Jonathan didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, took a deep breath, and simply said, "I believe she didn't think she had a choice." She agreed to meet him one final time to talk things through. He recounted everything: the years of infertility, the surprise pregnancy, the hiring of the investigator, and the discovery of Tyler's connection to Emily. He admitted he had suspected the affair, though he never imagined it would end in murder. Tyler was kind, attentive, and offered her something she hadn't felt in years: being seen. Outside, reporters gathered near the front entrance, trying to catch a glimpse of the pastor's wife who had once been the heart of Millstone Creek. Now she was the center of a murder investigation. As detectives began their questioning, Emily maintained her composure. Their relationship, according to her, had been brief and fueled by loneliness. She got in her car and left. That was the last time she saw him, she said. Then came the question she had likely prepared for. Had she killed him? Emily denied it. She said they met at a parking lot near the trailhead outside of town. She told him it was over. He shouted, threatened to expose her. But the evidence told another story. Investigators had retrieved surveillance footage from a gas station along the route to the creek where Tyler's body was found. When confronted with the footage, Emily didn't break. Outside the room, the case was quickly evolving. For the people of Millstone Creek, the story had shifted from tragic to terrifying. Gossip spread like wildfire. Jonathan, meanwhile, remained silent. Eventually, he visited the police station to give his official statement. He spoke with a calmness that surprised the detectives. He showed them the insurance documents, the anonymous envelope, the Bible found in the trunk. The trial began 2 months later. The courtroom was packed. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder with townspeople who once sang hymns beside the accused. They showed the insurance policy, the surveillance footage, the messages recovered from the USB drive. The defense painted a different picture. They described a woman trapped in a life defined by others, suffering silently for years, finally finding solace in someone who offered her comfort. Emily sat through it all with calm resolve. Her baby, a boy, had been born just 2 weeks before the trial. The child was taken into protective custody. Jonathan attended every day of the trial. He sat in the back, alone, expressionless. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom held its breath. Guilty, first-degree murder. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Emily showed no emotion as the words were read. She nodded once, stood, and allowed herself to be led away. Afterward, Jonathan walked out of the courthouse without speaking to anyone. The church closed its doors 3 months later. Without Jonathan, the congregation slowly dwindled. And in the middle of it all, a child grew up with no memory of the parents whose secrets had shaped his very beginning. Years passed, and the story that once consumed the town of Millstone Creek faded into a whisper, a cautionary tale told in hushed voices behind closed doors. The church was gone, converted into a small event hall that rarely booked anything beyond local birthday parties and retirement dinners. There, she was placed in a wing reserved for women serving long-term sentences. For months, he bounced between temporary homes while the legal system tried to decide his future. With no known relatives willing to come forward, and with Jonathan Reed's legal silence, the court ruled him a ward of the state. They knew the story, of course, but they never spoke of it. Not to Caleb, not to friends, not to neighbors. Inside were papers, photographs, and a small wooden cross. There was no note, no explanation. She wrote about Tyler's threats, his demands for money, his anger when she refused to leave her husband. They became part of a sealed archive never released to the public, but accessible to Caleb if he ever came looking. She described the night at the creek with chilling clarity, how she lured him there, pleaded with him to stay quiet, how he refused, how the argument turned violent. Teachers described him as mature for his age, but difficult to reach emotionally. He loved reading, especially mystery novels. He showed little interest in sports, but excelled in creative writing. He told his adoptive parents it was for a school project. In truth, he was chasing ghosts. When asked about his family history, he always gave short answers or changed the subject. He walked through the overgrown cemetery behind it, searching for names he might recognize. What he felt was a strange, hollow peace, like he had finally found the edge of a mystery he no longer needed to solve. He didn't find any markers for Jonathan or Emily, no headstones, no memorials. It was as if they had both been erased from the land they once ruled. Whatever legacy had been left behind of betrayal, faith, and murder, he had chosen to leave it where it belonged. Some kids whispered rumors. They had Googled his name and found snippets of the old story, but Caleb never acknowledged them. He carried himself with a quiet intensity, the kind that made people think twice before asking too much. She claimed she hit him in self-defense, panicked, and set fire to the car with the body nearby. The teacher praised it for its vivid emotion and subtle darkness. What she didn't know was that every detail in the story had been drawn from Caleb's own bloodline, pieced together from the fragments of a past he barely understood. But she never showed remorse, not in the way most people would expect. She ended one journal entry with the line, "I chose the life I wanted and I paid for it." But the photos were clear: his biological mother and father, standing together in front of the old Millstone Creek church, smiling as if the world had never fallen apart. Caleb didn't understand the weight of what he was holding. He only saw two strangers who looked vaguely familiar and a place he didn't recognize. He asked his adoptive parents, but they denied knowing anything about the box. Whether they were protecting him or someone else had left it, he never found out. He grew up with no understanding of where he came from, only that his early years had been complicated and that he was meant for a new beginning. The notebooks were raw and full of contradictions. In some entries, she blamed Tyler for manipulation, claiming he had blackmailed her, pressured her, scared her. In others, she admitted to feeling empowered by her choices, describing how she had finally taken control of her life, even if it meant ending someone else's. Her words were haunting, shifting between guilt and justification, sorrow and pride. That was the phrase his adoptive mother repeated often. Jonathan had never filed for guardianship. He had vanished just after the verdict, his last known location a motel outside of Charlotte. After that, no one saw him again. Her behavior was noted as calm, cooperative, and withdrawn. She kept to herself, rarely engaging in conversation unless necessary. She attended therapy sessions, filled out job assignments in the prison workshop, and spent hours in the library, reading anything she could get her hands on. But she never spoke about her case, her past, or the child she had given birth to behind bars. The stained glass windows had been replaced with plain frosted glass, and the altar had been torn down to make space for folding tables and plastic chairs. Most people who still lived in town avoided talking about what happened, choosing instead to remember the church as it used to be a place of peace, not scandal. Emily Reed was transferred to a state correctional facility a few weeks after sentencing. The baby, now a boy named Caleb, had been placed in foster care immediately after birth. Some believed he had left the country. Others said he had checked into a monastery under a different name. But no official trace of him was ever found. The man who had once led hundreds in worship had disappeared like dust on the wind, leaving behind a town, a scandal, and a child. Caleb was eventually adopted by a couple from another county. They were kind, private people who changed his last name and removed every trace of his biological connection. Still, the past has a way of echoing. On his 10th birthday, Caleb found a box under his bed that hadn't been there before. Meanwhile, in prison, Emily began writing journals. Page after page, she poured out details, timelines, emotions she had never expressed in court. She wrote about the pregnancy, how she had lied to Jonathan, convinced herself that a child would fix what had broken between them. The journals were eventually discovered by a prison librarian who handed them over to authorities. He didn't, at least not yet. In his teenage years, Caleb showed signs of quiet brilliance. He was thoughtful, observant, and often withdrawn. One day, during a school writing assignment, Caleb turned in a short story about a preacher who vanished after discovering a terrible secret. By the time he turned 18, Caleb had decided to visit Millstone Creek. He found the old church, now a faded community hall with cracked sidewalks and peeling paint. Still, he stood at the edge of the empty lot for a long time. He didn't cry, he didn't feel rage. Some stories end in answers, others end in silence. Caleb turned away from the church as dusk settled in. He carried no souvenirs, took no photos, buried, unspoken, and finished.